All right, guys. So we've been hearing the term gradient. So now we're going to try and see if we can understand what gradient means. Now, gradient is a measure of the amount of steepness of a slope. I think the Americans would call gradient slope, but gradient is actually a measure of the amount of steepness of a slope. It is a measure, and a measure was always designed to tell you something. So, for example, your speed limit, 80 kilometers per hour, your speed, it is a measure. It's designed to tell you something. So, gradient is a similar thing. It's a measure. It's designed to tell you something. Gradient is a measure of the amount of steepness of a slope. Gradient is telling you how steep something is. The next point is this: the steeper a slope is, the higher is its gradient. Guys, here are some lines. I'm going to put numbers to them. So this is number 1, number 2, line number 3, line number 4, and line number 5. Guys, what's the gradient of line number 1? Anybody?
2.
Very good. What's the gradient? What is the y-intercept for line number 1?
2.
Talk to me.
2.
The y-intercept is 2. For line number 2, what is the gradient? Let me call names because nobody seems to be answering. Line number 2, Joanna, what's the gradient?
1.
Very good. What's the y-intercept?
2.
Anaya, line number 3, what's the gradient?
A half.
Very good. What's the y-intercept?
2.
Jadon, line number 4, what's the gradient? What's the y-intercept? Guys, now the y-intercept for all of these lines, for line number 5, I'll tell you, the gradient is 0. And the y-intercept is 2. Now, for all of these lines, guys, so this diagram is showing you something. It's showing you a few things, but one of the things it's showing is that the number at the end here tells you where the graph cuts the y-axis. The number at the end is the y-intercept. So here, all of these lines have the same y-intercept. It means that they all cut the graph, the y-axis at 2. Guys, it says complete the statement by circling the correct response. When 2 or more lines have the same y-intercept, they meet the y-axis at the same point or at different points. Guys, when 2 or more lines have the same y-intercept, they meet the y-axis at anybody? All right, Jaden says at the same point. So all of these lines meet the y-axis at 2. All of these lines meet the y-axis at 2. Guys, of all of these 5 lines, which line is the steepest? Anybody? Of all of these lines, which line is the steepest?
Line 5.
Very good. All right. And what you'll notice is that the steepest line, line 5, has the highest gradient, which is 2. The steepest line, line 1, has the highest gradient, which is 2. guys, you'll notice that the gradient of line 5 is 0 because gradient is measuring steepness. Line 5 is horizontal, so it has no steepness. So its steepness is 0. So what is this line designed to show you? Or what is this line showing you? It is showing you, 1, that the steepest line has the highest gradient. 2, if a line is horizontal, its gradient is 0. 3, if you have several lines with the same y-intercept, they all meet the y-axis at the same point. Guys, gradient is a measure of the amount of steepness of a slope, and the steeper a line is, the higher is its gradient. Guys, let's talk about positive, negative, and infinite gradient. All right, looking at the table to the right, above it, it says moving from left to right. Guys, if you're moving from left to right and the line slopes up, its gradient is positive. Moving from left to right, if the line slopes up, its gradient is positive. Moving from left to right, if the line slopes down, its gradient is negative. Moving from left to right, well, not even moving from left to right. Moving from left to right, slope up, gradient is positive. Slope down, gradient is negative. If the line is horizontal, its gradient is 0. If the line is vertical, its gradient is infinitely large. Gradient, guys, moving from left to right, if the line slopes up, its gradient is positive. If the line slopes down, its gradient is negative. Guys, if a line is horizontal, its gradient is 0. If a line is vertical, its gradient is infinitely large.